So that is happening. So this is a joint venture between the library and the garden club. It's happened before in previous years, and it may seem like it's been forever since it's happened with COVID, but we really have only had about a year's hiatus. If you're looking for other programs that are ongoing at the library, I would suggest that you log into the library, which is rockportlibrary.org// events. You can see the entire library calendar and sign up for events. If you have questions, interested in joining the garden club, you can log in at rockportgardenclub.org, and they've got a robust website there where you can see who the members are, what their past events are, future events, and lots of information that they have available there. What the program is going to consist of essentially tonight is an overview with Liz Fatuti is going to be giving an overview of plantings, how to prep your soil, how to plant your seeds indoors at the appropriate time, etc. We realize this is just going to be about an hour's worth of information, and you can go on forever. The Garden Club has generously offered for anybody who wishes to reach out to them for questions, to hit the communications at rockportgardenclub.org. That's a section of their website that allows you to leave questions, if anything of a gardening nature. Communications at rockportgardenclub.org. Before we continue, I'd also like to offer a special thanks to the evening for the three businesses in the area who were kind enough to provide us the seeds. For without that, we really wouldn't have a program. That would be Smith Hardware and Lumber, Wolf Hill Garden Center, and the Common Crow. So a big shout out to them and thanks. Essentially, and for Mary Dakin for actually stewarding that outreach to go and grab those seeds and forge forward with those relationships. So I think the best way to handle it with lots of people on with Zoom, we've all been on Zoom, and if you haven't, please feel free to text me in the chat function, and I can certainly answer your questions. But I think the best way of serving the speaker would be to keep yourself on mute. And once the program begins, also to stop your video. That does not keep you from seeing, but rather from others seeing you, and this keeps it from being distracting. At the end of the program, what we will do is we will have question and answer session for those people who know best, which is not me. The folks at the Garden Club will answer your questions. And I'll ask you as the program is going on, just shoot an email to me. I'm Dana in the chat. That serves to either A, hold your place in the questions, and B, if you're anything like me, you're probably going to forget what your question is by the time the program ends. So that also helps to clarify and ensure that that doesn't happen. One last thing that I will add, there are books for sale at the library. Again, generous donations by the members of the Garden Club. We have a large book rack just as you walk in the back door of the library. That's where the parking is. And you can purchase for $1 a book lots of very specific books on gardening, planting, seeds, etc. And that is also where you'll be collecting your seeds. Starting tomorrow, they will be made available. Since we don't have the number of seed packets that we've had in previous years, we're going to ask people to limit it to 3 packets if you could. And if we do get another round of seeds, we'll certainly regerminate that group and add more seeds to it for your taking pleasure. So again, I'm going to ask people to mute themselves, to turn off your video, and we'll be doing some they'll be doing some questions and answers in a little bit. So if everybody can just mute themselves and again, type your questions in the chat. So I'm going to turn this over to Liz, who is going to really handle the programming for the most part this evening. And again, I thank everybody for joining and being part of this. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Liz Fatuhi, and I currently reside in Vermont. I lived down there in Rockport for a couple of years and joined the garden club at that time, and really appreciate that local garden, the local garden club there in Rockport. It is filled with very experienced and knowledgeable gardeners. So I would encourage you, if you do have questions, to contact us. If one person doesn't know the answer, someone else knows it, or they know where to find it. So I'm going to switch, I'm going to get started. So I'm going to switch over to share my screen with everybody. So give me just a second for that. There we go. All right. So a garden is not a place, it's a journey. And I started with this. This is by Monty Don, one of my favorite gardeners. If you can find him on YouTube, I highly would encourage you to do that. He's a great gardener, puts things in very simple ways to understand. But I guess what I wanted to start with this quote, because gardening can be very overwhelming. There's so much to learn. And as long as you do gardening, you are still learning. When I first started gardening, I really thought, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I don't know anything. And just kind of year by year learned and read books and talked to people. And it really is a journey. I think this is an adequate quote. That so if you're a beginner gardening, try not to get overwhelmed, try not to be disheartened. It's a journey. It's, you just start and then you build upon that. So the whole purpose of this is to hopefully inspire you to either expand your gardening or begin to garden, teach others to garden, bring your grandchildren into gardening. So it's really just, that's the purpose of this. So the first thing, there was a time when I would design people's gardens. And when I would go to a client, the first thing I would say, well, what kind of a garden do you want? Do you want to just have food and veggies? Do you want flower garden? Do you want a cut garden? Do you want a fragrant garden? And, and how are you going to use that garden? And those are the questions you want to ask yourself. What do I want to do in my garden? Do I just want to do I want to just have flowers that I can sit amongst? Do I want to raise some food? Do I want to pollinate? And, so those are some of the questions you start with, and that will get you on your way to how you want to design it and what you want to plant in it. Shade garden. There are a lot of people who don't have any sun. My garden is all sun. And finally, I've got a couple of crabapple trees that have grown big enough now to where I've got some shade. So last year and this year, I'm digging out a lot of sun plants and having to move them. And I'm finally able to have a shade garden. As you can see by this photo, they're so cooling in the hot summer. I mean, when you look at this picture, you can feel the coolness of it. These are mostly hostas, and hostas come in hundreds and hundreds of different varieties. I think you could buy one, you could just keep buying them till the end of time and there would still be more. They're a very easy plant to grow. They're very easy, in fact, love to be divided and do very well divided. They're easy. So for a beginner garden, a hosta is a really great plant to start with. And you can see there are variegated leaves. This one's got some variegation. This is probably an empress, which these can get up to 5 or 6 feet wide. So if you've got a real big space that you want to just plop something in, that's a good one to get. So a shade garden. If you've got shade, there's plenty of things, plenty of plants that you can get for a shade garden. This one doesn't have one, but I think a water feature would look lovely in here. Another kind of garden would be a formal border garden. If you look at this, there's another one of those big Empress hostas, and you can see there's some others, but we got a daylily here, so we know this gets some sun. We've got some astilbes down here, so this is probably a part sun, part shade garden. But what makes it formal is you can kind of see how everything is spaced. So this is a little more formal. It's got your bird bath there, so a little bit of hardscaping going on. It's got a border edge here. A lot of people like this. My husband would love for me to have this kind of garden. Unfortunately, this is not the kind of garden I have. But Here's another example of a formal garden. You can see it's framed, very geometric. These boxwoods, and you could plant anything in there. A monochromatic garden. I love these gardens, especially if they're white, because they are beautiful in the moonlight and they can be very calming. And again, if you take a look here, we've got so many different varieties. And then if you have just all hydrangeas, isn't that just so impressive? That's one thing I want to do. In one of my gardens, I'd like to have a wall of hydrangeas. I think that would be beautiful. Container gardens. If you don't have a yard, if maybe you just have a deck or a balcony. When I was living in Rockport, I lived in an apartment with a quite large balcony. And so I did all container gardening. And it was so fun because I had never done that before. And so I was really able to put some different combinations together. I grew even some food in there, you know, some things that would grow depending on what kind of sun hits your deck. But you can see you can get tomatoes, you can put blueberries. There are blueberry bushes that are made that can be put right into pots. Potatoes do beautifully in pots. You do have to water more frequently, and you will have to do regular feeding, because as you water, all that nutrient will start to get washed out. But so if you have you can see here, they've really, a drip system would be great for this. That would probably cut down on your labor to put a drip system in here, but container gardening is a great way to go. They do sell self-watering containers, and they're a little more pricey, but they will, you know, lessen your watering load. A cutting garden. This is something that I personally have just started looking into, because every time I go out in my garden, I hate to cut any of the flowers that are in my garden. So I thought this year I'm going to have to put a cutting garden in there. And this Renee's Gardens, you can get these in almost any garden nursery, and these flower mixes, and they're really easy to plant, and they kind of just give you all kinds. You can see you've got some cosmos in there, but a cutting garden, then you can go out and, you know, cut to your heart's delight, and you're not messing up your regular garden. But you can put perennials, annuals, herbs. Don't forget to look at your food items for cut flowers. Dill makes a beautiful cut flower and so fragrant in a bouquet. And a lot, you know, in any other kind of herb. If some of your herbs have bolted and had the flowers on there, you know, cut them and put them in a vase. They're very pretty and very, you know, very fragrant. Tubers, you know, like your dahlias, you can use those. So cutting gardens are fun. Do a mixture of annuals and perennials will definitely keep your garden blooming, because as we all know, annuals will just continue blooming throughout the year, whereas perennials, you know, they bloom for a while and then stop. But if you put a mixture in, then you've always got something in bloom. Pollinator gardens. I think this is something that is becoming more and more popular, which anyone who is an avid gardener is very happy about this. And there's nothing more pleasurable than looking out in your garden and seeing it covered with butterflies and bees and other insects. So this is wildflowers. Someone has just planted wildflowers out here. This is some milkweed here. And then this has got, we've got bee balm and echinacea in there, and several other things. So a pollinator garden, I would encourage everyone to plant a pollinator garden. Here's another picture of a pollinator garden. We've got some Joe Pye weed back here in the back. That's a great addition to any garden. And they have some they're small, whereas a regular Joe Pye weed maybe get up to like 5 feet. They do have a smaller one that's only about 3 feet, 3 to 4 feet. This is, I believe this is Liatris, which is a wonderful pollinator. Black-eyed Susan's here. A cottage garden, as I mentioned earlier, my husband loves a formal garden. Unfortunately, this is what I like. And you can really see the difference between a pollinator garden and a formal garden. I love, not a pollinator, excuse me, cottage garden. I love cottage gardens. And I'll just tell you real quickly, a cottage garden really came from when you had people in Europe that could not own land. You know, the aristocracy was the only people who could own land, and they had tenants to work that land. And those tenants lived in little cottages, and they would have a small little yard. And so they had to plant everything they wanted in that space around their cottage. And they would have, that's where they would plant medicinal plants, they would herbs, food plants, you know, everything went in that. And so that's where the term cottage garden comes from. It's a lot of different things living together. We have a more modern name for that, which is polyculture, which is a form of agriculture in which more than one species is grown at the same time and place. The benefit to that is that because you've got all these different things mixed together, they're going to work together to repel some insects, and then also they'll maybe attract the beneficial insects. They'll help feed each other. It's a more efficient use of space. As I said, those tenants used, you know, they had a small space, so they didn't have the luxury of having big yards or, you know, I have 5 acres. Well, they didn't have that. And so if you have a small yard, which they're in Rockport and in most homes, you know, your space can be quite small. So this is a great way, and I like the look of it. For me, I just think it's beautiful when you've got some lettuce over here, and you've got chives here, and you've got some tomatoes here, but then you've got the marigolds mixed in there. And, you know, you could put strawberries in there with that, or some small blueberry plants in there, some herbs, chamomile, you know, you could really just put them together and they all work together lovely. So what used to be a cottage flower, we call polyculture now. There's also the French potager garden, which is basically, I think, you know, how we all know the relationship between the English and the French. I kind of feel like the French looked at the English cottage garden and said, we can do better, and developed the potager. As you can see, it's the same principle. You have different things all planted together. There's some fruit trees here. They have flowers, but they also have some food crops, herbs, but it's done in a much more formal manner. This is at a castle in France. You know, it can be very, very formal. This is a little, you know, it's still on a formal that you have the straight lines. They always have something in the center like this, you know, all kind of like all roads lead to Rome. They'll have paths that go around and come around a center feature. I love these gardens, again, because I love the mixture of them, but it's also known as a French kitchen garden. Got a picture of a couple more here. So there again, this is even a little more casual, but you can still see we've got those straight paths. We've got some of this woven, which is very common in an English cottage or the French potager. Usually you'll have, as you can see in both, we've got trellises for height, so we can grow beans up there. You could grow hops, you could grow even clematis, you know, so they're just bringing that height. But you can see in here, we've got some herbs, got some kale, looks like beans probably in here. And then with your brick paths. So morning glory, we've got some morning glories there. Some fruit trees here. So again, you can get really creative. You know, we don't have to do, you know, the typical vegetable garden where we've got all straight rows of, you know, got a row of tomatoes, a row of onions, a row of corn, and you can be a lot more decorative. And I would much rather walk around in something like this. And within those gardens, you're going to see a lot of companion planting. Companion planting will give you much better yields in your food. I just went on Google, punched in companion planting. And there were a ton of different websites that will give you charts like this that will, say, okay, a tomato, here's the partners. Here's one that will say what's a good plant. And so here's a good companion, and don't plant it with these. I find this very helpful. So I would encourage this, I think, and a lot of them you can print out and then just hang up at, this is a great tool to use for companion planting. And you can do this with food and with other flowers. There you can do companion planting with flowers. Some go better together either for color or just they like each other, and some of them don't. So let's talk about the different flowers and what is a perennial, what is an annual, what is a biannual. So a perennial is a plant that will live for many years. They all have a lifespan. So I think some people are under the misnomer that, oh, if I get a perennial, it's never going to die. Unfortunately, they do have a lifespan, and they will eventually just kind of wear out. But for that period of time, which is, I don't know, 8, depending on what it is. Mine usually, I notice around 8 years, 9 years, they're starting to get a little tired. Sometimes if I divide them, they can kind of reboot. But they all have their lifespan, as we all do. But they will come back year after year. They bloom for about 3 to 4 weeks, and then they're kind of done. An annual, it blooms all season, and none of them will be, they're not going to be from your region. They're usually tropical plants. So you'll get all those vivid colors. But they only will bloom one season. Now, some of them, if they go to seed, will spread that seed and that'll reseed. But I wouldn't call them a perennial. These are some of the ones that are annuals, but they reseed. And then a biennial. Usually it's 2 years, and they bloom every other year. They'll self-seed and they'll bloom the second year. So if you want hollyhocks, you're going to plant at least 2 years in a row, so that 1 year one's going to bloom, and then the next year they're going to bloom, then the next, so with those, so we've got hollyhock, sweet William, foxglove, and stock. Those are examples of some biennials. So that's the difference between them. Annuals too, we usually use those in pots a lot. Natives. This is something that the Garden Club, the Rockport Garden Club, is really trying to encourage people to plant in their gardens. What is a native plant? Our garden club had Dan Jaffe give a lecture once, and he really had a good way of looking at it. He said, we can say, well, it's native to Rockport, or it's native to Massachusetts, or we can say, well, it's native to New England. Or it's native to North America. So it's kind of like, okay, what are we defining native as? For me, I try to get something that is from my region or my state. Is this native? I'm in Vermont, so I'd be asking, is this native to Vermont? Or at least, is it native to New England? Because, and the reason for that is that for thousands of years, these native plants have grown here and they've adapted. Well, not only have they done that, but the insects have also adapted to those particular plants. And so they will feed off those plants, and those plants will benefit them because of that thousands or millions of years of evolution. So if you bring in a plant that really is not native to your area, it doesn't mean that it won't pollinate, because there are, zinnias. Zinnia is a great pollinator plant, but is it native? No, it isn't. So natives are better in that they've been there for a long time, and they feed those insects that we need. Because if they don't have that food, we're losing a lot of insects. That's something you might want to research. Doug Ptolemy has written some books on this, about insects and the need for natives in order to keep our native insects alive. which, you know, it's a chain reaction where everything's linked. And I think we're beginning to learn that more and more. So we at the Garden Club really do encourage people to plant as many natives as you can. Now, I love natives and I'm adding them to my garden, but I also love my peonies. So I keep my peonies, but I put cornflowers next to them. Or, you know, I'll put another plant next to them that's a native. So that's how I would do it, but just add more and more and more and more. This is a wildflower field and it is gorgeous. So think about natives, the benefit of natives other than what they do for our insects. And of course, and remember too, what do we have? What part do insects play? Well, they're food source. They're a food source for birds and moths and butterflies. So it's a chain reaction. So that's why we want these. And more nurseries, I believe, are beginning to carry more and more natives. So if you've got room, put some natives in there. These are two great books. One, this is by Dan Jaffe, Native Plants. I've got this book. It's a really good book. It's full of plants that you can get. And then this is by Doug Ptolemy, Bringing Nature Home, How Native Plants Sustain Wildlife in Our Gardens. And then right down here, there's a great YouTube lecture by Doug Ptolemy in Burlington, Vermont. And then there's another one that's in his garden. So those are great to watch. They're not very long, but really informative. So these are some great sources, especially this one. Dan has really, you can plant a whole garden just out of this book. Invasives, know them and don't plant them. The Mass Audubon has a great list of invasives in Massachusetts. So I would encourage you to go look at that. And then the Rockport Garden Club, we have a great invasive team that will help you get rid of, especially if you have something like the Japanese knotweed. They're very experienced in helping residents get rid of this stuff. So if you can keep from planting it, is the best thing to do. This picture in the background is goutweed, or it's called bishop's weed. And when I first became a gardener and I was talking to a friend of mine, the first piece of advice she told me was, don't ever plant bishop's weed. And I didn't know bishop's weed from anything else. And I was like, okay. And of course I saw it in someone's yard and thought, well, why would you not? That looks pretty. Well, then I learned. Thankfully I never planted it in my garden, but I did see it in others. And when I maintained people's gardens for a few years, oh, I battled that stuff, and it's a losing battle most of the time. But again, the Rockport Garden Club and the Millbrook Meadow team, there was a lot of this goutweed in Millbrook Meadow, and they have done a tremendous job of getting that stuff out of there. So if you have this in your garden and you just can't get rid of it, again, contact the Rockport Garden Club, and they can really help you get rid of this stuff. It's a very happy plant, but know your invasives and don't plant them. So now what? Well, there's the big 5 questions. Your site, the location. What's your soil like? What kind of light do you have? What's your water source? And what zone are you in? These are all the first questions you're going to need to ask. Are you in the city? Rockport, you're in the city. You're in a suburban place, small town. Do you have a big space or small space? Patio or balcony? We kind of talked about that. Is your area flat or sloped? My property here in Vermont is all sloped. Everything's on a hill. Are you by the seaside? That's where you guys in Rockport and Cape Ann, you're by the seaside, which is a completely different garden zone. Your site's going to determine what plants will be the most successful, and that's what you want. You don't want to try to change your landscape. You want to plant according to your landscape. Otherwise, you're just going to be fighting constantly, and that can get tiring, defeating, and expensive. So look at your landscape and say, okay, what have I got, and how do I plant that landscape? And it all starts with your soil. It all starts with building that good foundation. So you've got your soil pH. Is your soil acidic or is it alkaline? It's a great thing before you even put anything to ground to test that, see what your pH is. And you can get a test right from the hardware store. They're not expensive. They're easy to do at home. If you want to go further and test your soil for nutrients, the University of Massachusetts offers soil testing. You can put them in a little tube, send them to there. Here's their website, and they'll send it back to you and say, well, you're too high on nitrogen, or you're too low on nitrogen, or you've got calcium, or you've got that. And that'll let you know if you need to amend your soil for what you're wanting to plant. Which goes back to that very first question when we started. What do you want to do with your garden? And so these questions right here then go together with that. So for instance, if you want to grow blueberries, well, you're going to need to have an acidic soil for that. Whereas other plants like tomatoes, collards, greens, they like more of a, kind of a neutral pH. And so those are things you want to know. I have a friend there in Rockport that she planted her blueberries next to her strawberries. Well, they're not happy because strawberries like an alkaline soil, while blueberries like an acidic soil. So while they are there and they're each producing, they would do much better if they were not together and each of them had the kind of soil they really love. And changing the acidity of your soil is really pretty easy to do by adding different content to that, which again, it's stuff that you can buy right there at your garden nursery, your hardware store. So if you get that test and you find out, well, I want to plant blueberries, okay, then test your soil and see where it falls in your alkaline. And here's your pH scale here. Neutral's right here. And most plants like this area, but you do have some, they're going to want the other end of the spectrum. And again, it's an easy test, inexpensive to buy, and pretty quick. You don't have to send it off to see what your pH is. So they're on Cape Ann and Rockport. You're mostly sandy loam, meaning it has a low pH, making it more acidic. So, and it has great drainage because of all that sand in there. The bad thing about it is that because it has great drainage, your nutrients are going to go through it faster. So you're going to want to feed your soil there, maybe more than I do. I have clay soil. Clay, though it's very difficult to work with, once you amend it, I use tons and tons and tons of compost. And once I mix that compost in there, that clay becomes really nice and holds the nutrients. And so during a drought, even, I'm not really having to water because that clay is mixed in there and it's holding those nutrients. So it can be just a real monster to work with. But once it's been amended, it's really lovely. My neighbor, who also obviously has clay soil, he decided to build his garden beds up. So he just brought a bunch of new soil that was real loamy and built his gardens up. Well, in times of drought, he's out there having to water, whereas I'm not. So his gardening and digging is a little bit easier, but we're all on wells. So I like the fact that I don't have to get my hose out there and, start draining my well. So, but down there where you guys are, it is going to be sandy loam, and that is going to make it acidic. So just kind of know that right off the bat, and that you're probably going to have to add some food. So let's talk about amending your soil. All types of soil, clay, sandy, or loam, benefit from adding organic matter. Now you shouldn't, up here in Vermont, again, I only bring in a bunch of compost about once every 3 to 4 years, again, because I have clay. Now down there where you guys are, you may have to do it each year or each other year, depending on how much sand. I know there are some areas that actually do have some clay mixed in there, not to the degree that I have clay, but there is more clay. And some great things for that is rotted manure, rotted leaves, food scraps, no meat, and of course, compost. And just as a side note, the transfer station there in Rockport has compost, and it has been tested, And it's good compost. We have a number of our members who use it and speak very highly of it, very highly of it. They haven't had any problems with weeds or any kind of infections, or anything like that. So, and it's free. You can just go load it up in your buckets and take it home. So just, something you might want to think about instead of, buying bags and bags and bags and bags of it. So you've got a great resource right there in Rockport. But it will improve the drainage in clay soils. Like I said, I can have a chunk of clay here in my yard that I could probably make a pot out of it if I had a wheel. And I just get a handful of compost, and just in my hands, I can mix that together. And within a few minutes, it's beautiful soil. So that compost, it really is black gold, and it's amazing what it will do. And that's the only thing I use to amend my soil is compost. I don't really put anything else in there. So light and temperature. Again, you'll go to the plant store, and when you go buy plants, you want to look at the tags and see, well, how much sun does this need? And what does it mean if it says full sun? Well, full sun means you need 8 hours or more sun for that plant. Part sun is 6 to 8 hours. Part shade is 6 hours or less. Full shade is you're receiving 2 hours or less of sun a day. Morning sun is cooler than afternoon sun. Most vegetables require full sun, while others benefit from morning sun and afternoon shade, like lettuce, spinach. Those things don't particularly like afternoon sun. They prefer morning. And there are some flowers that love morning sun, but not real happy with that afternoon. That afternoon sun can be really hot. It's sitting lower in the sky. And you've noticed it in your house. If you have windows facing the west, that sun coming through the west can be brutal. So that's how you define what is full, part, and sorry, I had to go drink. Water, you're going to need it. So how are you going to water that? Are you going to have a sprinkler system, which is the worst? A drip system, a soaker hose, or just a water hose? I know down there in Rockport, when we were there, there was the two full summers that we had water restrictions due to that, the filter not working, or, they had to rebuild that filter. So you need to know that. How am I going to get my stuff watered? If you're going to just use a hose or something like that, it's best to water plants down at the base and give them a deep, deep watering. It's better for a plant to have a deep watering, once or twice a week than a shallow watering every day. Because if that deep watering will encourage those roots to really go down deep. And so your plant will be healthier for it. Going out there and watering every day, just a little bit, it's going to keep your plant alive, but your plant's not going to thrive. It's not going to become strong and healthy. So give it a good soaking, once or twice a week, and you'll see the difference than going out every single day. And again, I'll take you back to the Rockport Garden Club to look under gardening for any help. I think a drip system is great because they're pretty easy to install. They can be put on a timer so that you're not having, if you're going away maybe for a few days, you don't have to worry about stuff because it'll be on a timer and it'll come on. And it's just very efficient. Same thing with the soaker hose. I think the drip system's a little bit better, but this is the sprinkler. I put it in there, but it's probably the worst way you could water your plants is from a sprinkler. Those were invented for lawns. So Cape-Ann is a zone 6. That means the lowest temperatures in the winter range between 0 and -5 degrees. Up here in Vermont, in my garden, I'm a zone 4. Now on this next one, there can be microclimates. 6 miles across town, they're a zone 5. I'm a zone 4. Certain parts of my house are even a zone 3. So you can have microclimates around your property depending on if there's a wind tunnel there, or if it's a sunny space on the south side of your house, maybe. You might be a full half zone to a zone warmer on the south side of your house than you are on the north side of your house. If you're getting west winds, those are good. Something might do better on the east side rather than on the west side of your house. So, you kind of look at all those things. And wind can play a really important role in what you plant where. I've learned this from personal experience. I've killed more than one shrub from putting it in a place that just the wind itself, that winter wind can be brutal. So, look at where you get hard winds. And again, I point to the Rockport Garden Club for more information. But know your zone. When you buy a plant, look at that and see, don't plant a zone 7 in your zone 6. Unless you plan on wrapping it and mulching it during your winter time. Again, like I said before, work with your landscape. Don't try to change it, work with it. So sourcing your plants, where are we getting our plants? You can get them at the garden nursery, seeds, which we're going to get to. Local plant sales are a great place to get your plants because they have been grown locally and they're going to survive. So they'll probably survive in your yard. Friends and neighbors, it's really fun I had a friend who started her whole garden from getting divisions of plants from all our friends. And that garden, she loves that garden because she can look at this plant and say, oh, Lizzie gave me that, or Sherry gave me that, and so that's a source. I didn't put catalogs on here. I think buying things like tubers, seeds, stuff like that is good from catalogs. I personally have not had a lot of luck with plants. What the picture you see in the catalog is not what arrives at your door. I'm not saying don't buy them. I tried it a few times and I found that they didn't do very well, but I know some people who have ordered them and have done well. But I prefer just going to a local garden nursery because if that plant dies, most nurseries have a 1-year warranty on their plants. And so you can go back and say, hey, this plant, fizzled out on me. And you can get a lot of advice from there too. So if you are getting plants from local plant sales and friends and neighbors, you do want to just kind of give them a once over and make sure and from garden nurseries too, make sure there's no bugs. Look at the leaves carefully. Do you see signs? It's not uncommon for garden nurseries to get shipments of plants that do have disease and bugs on them. So you want to look at that real close. So let's talk about starting from seeds. Why do we want to start from seeds? Well, because it's easy to do. It can be less expensive in the long run. You can get a much greater variety of plants, flowers and things and veggies from your seeds than what you will find in your garden nurseries. And if you live in the Northeast, and especially up here in Vermont, it makes the last dark days of winter seem like spring. I don't know about you guys, but come about late February and into March, I'm getting cabin fever. And I've had just about enough of the cold and the wind and the snow and the dark. And I started growing some seeds and I couldn't believe the difference it made in how I felt. It's just wonderful. It's such a game changer for these long, cold winters. How to start the seeds. Some seeds need to be soaked, scratched, or chilled before you're planting. So make sure you read the packet. We scheduled this lecture for this early because some of the seeds need a cold period. And so starting now, if you start going and buying seeds, you'll have time to give them that cold period before they're ready to plant. They sprout best at temperatures between 65 and 75 degrees. Some bottom heat is good to warm the soil. You want to keep the soil moist. Don't allow the seeds to dry out. You can do that by creating a greenhouse effect. Once germinated, the seedlings will need 15 to 17 hours of light a day. Now most seeds, again, read the packet, but a lot of seeds don't need light to germinate. But once they do germinate, they boy, they really need it. They're hungry little babies and they're looking for that light. And then of course you're going to harden them off before planting outdoors. Now that was the step that caused me the most angst, I have to say, because you go through all this work. It's kind of like you become pregnant, you're building that baby inside, and then, you give birth to it. It's like, oh my God, what do I do? What do I now? Do I throw it outside? How do I get it? Kind of like those parents that used to teach their children to swim by throwing them in the water. That's not the best way to go about it. So same thing with these little babies. You got to introduce them gradually to outside.
Is holding steady, but the wind is from the south-southwest, and everything, as we look in that direction, is warmer than we are.
I think someone needs to mute themselves.
The temperature will actually be rising.
Abby Fletcher, maybe Newt.
Now, which is anywhere from the mid to upper 30s.
Great. Okay. So here's some, I don't know if you guys can see them. Backyardgrowers.org is a great website. Growagoodlife.com is a great, and High Mowing Seeds. This is a wonderful place for seeds, information, everything. So these 3 sites I recommend. So here, the equipment that you're going to need. A couple of slides back, if I said, it said that in the long run, there is an initial investment to doing this, but really once you've made that investment, that, your first or second year, you're kind of good to go after that. So what you're going to need is some shelving, lights, seed trays, a small fan. And I'm going to say right here, get the small fan. I decided I didn't need a small fan. And I learned the hard way, as usually in life, my lessons are learned the hard way. Yes, you do need that small fan. A heat mat, a spray bottle, germination mix, and seeds. Here's your seeds. You can, right now, there are lots of places, your hardware store, your garden nursery. I try to get organic seeds, things that are not GMO, but that's a personal preference. You get what you like. And here, this is how I got started. These are the exact things that I purchased. So these are grow lights, and I got these all off Amazon, as you can see. And I got the 2-foot long ones, and I got 6 of them for $69.99, so $70. I think it was free delivery. They also come in 4-foot. You can get 6 of them for $99 or $100. So I got, I think I bought 2 sets, and I got this little greenhouse. I got 2 of these. Now this is about $50, $55, somewhere around in there. They are great. They don't take up a lot of space. They're lightweight. They're very easy to move around. I just had them in my living room up against the wall, and they have a little, as you can see right here, they have a little door that rolls up. There's 4 different shelves. And each one of these shelves hold a flat tray. And I think there's I want to say the trays are 24 little compartments. Each shelf will hold 2. So you can grow quite a number of plants in that small space. And they're not expensive, like I said, and that top comes off. But it's great because this is how you can create your greenhouse effect very easily, by lowering this or, putting it up. And then what was also nice about this, you can see the wheels, and here's a better picture. When it came time to harden my plants off, I just rolled this baby right outside. And that gave them a little extra protection. And then, as they got used to it, I took the top of it off and exposed them a little bit longer. And then I could just roll it right back in the house at night, because the temperatures would drop at night. And it did beautifully. So these are what I used. Now, so they're seed starter or potting mix. You can certainly use potting mix. Where seed starter comes in is it does just give it a little bit of more of the stuff for those seeds to start. And if you live in a high humidity area, the seed starter mix will help to prevent the fungal growth, which is something you do want to watch out for. That when I mentioned that little fan, that's another thing. But so I would just go ahead and get the, especially if you're doing this for the first time, just get the seed starter mix and save your, just play it on the safe side. I put this picture down here because the first year that I started seeds, I put my soil all in my little pots, and then I used a little spray bottle to moisten the soil. And then I saw a video of a woman that she has one of these trays. And I just bought a litter box, clean litter box from the pet store. And she pre-moistened the soil before she put it in to the little pots. And you're going to moisten it to it just kind of holds together. I don't know if anyone's ever made pie dough or scones, but it's kind of like that. It's not going to be wet. It's just going to hold together. And then you put it into the pots and then plant your seeds in there. And it's much easier than trying to water them after you put the seeds in them. So that's just a little tip trick that I learned and thought I would share with everybody. So what are we going to plant them in? So you can see all the different containers. Here's the little plastic ones. These are the ones that compost down. These are great because you don't have these, you have to take them out, which can be tricky. I'm not going to lie. These here, you just tear them and stick the whole thing in the ground because this just, breaks down. And you can get them larger. These are smaller. These are the larger ones so these are great for like tomatoes. I would start tomatoes in these. Here's someone that has used milk cartons and just cut them in half. You can see there's some egg cartons over here, egg cartons over here. I think these are yogurt cups. You'd want to make sure all these have drainage. And I will say Gardener's Supply sells these that are self-watering. They have a mat in the bottom and a little reservoir that you fill with water. And so again, you could, if you want to leave for a few days, if you have one of these self-watering trays, you'll know that your little seedlings are still going to get water during that few days you're gone. Or if you have someone coming to take care of them, all they have to do is put water in the bottom of it. They don't have to, worry about, am I putting too much, too little, or whatever. So again, it's going to cost more, but they are reusable. And it saves you some time. So these are the different, and obviously if you get these, you can reuse them. So the heat mat. Now I did not buy a heat mat and mine did fine. But I know other gardeners who grow a lot of seeds indoors and they swear by getting these heat mats. I just got this off of Amazon. So this is a current price. It's two, they're 10 by 20, which is about the size of a tray. And it was $27.99. So I thought that, well, that was pretty good because, again, you're going to use this for years and years and years. And the reason you might think about getting this is there are some seeds that really want that soil to be warm. Now, if this is in your house, whatever your room temperature is, that's going to be how warm your soil is. So if you keep your room at 65, your soil is 65. Now, under those lights, obviously those lights are going to heat it somewhat. They're going to bring the temperature up. But I was looking at this. And if you look, beans here, their optimum range is 75 to 85 degrees. Now, I don't know how many of us keep our houses that warm. I know I don't. And eggplants, look at that, 75 to 85. They like warm soil to germinate. And then down here, peppers. Peppers are another one that really, they like it warm. And squash. So if you're wanting to start any of these by seeds, just know they like it a little bit warmer. So you don't have to put one of these under all your seeds, but maybe if you want to grow a bunch of eggplant that, okay, I'm going to put that underneath my things of eggplant. So again, I did not use a heat mat with mine and all of mine did fine, but I'm going to buy these because I think they're really well priced and I'd like to just see what difference it makes. So I'm going to get some this year and just kind of see if I have better, if they germinate better. This is winter sowing. This is something I've never done. I've just been looking into this. I think it's fascinating. And you take milk jugs or water jugs, they just clear, you cut them, fold them back like this, fill them full of soil, and then you put seeds. Now, these are usually plants, they're going to be perennial seeds, or they're going to be, excuse me, seeds that need some cold stratification period. And there's a list of seeds. When you look at that packet, it might say needs to be cold for 6 weeks before you do this. Well, this is a great way to do it because you put them in there and then you stick them outside up against a wall somewhere while it's still winter, you know, and so they're getting that cold period, and then they will begin to germinate. And then, you know, you kind of take them apart. Again, this is something I have not done, but it's something I'd like to try this winter. I'm going to try, maybe if I don't do it this one or the next. AmericanMeadows.com has a great page, if you go on that, that is explains all this and is step by step. So AmericanMeadows.com is a great resource for learning how to do this. I think this would just be fun to try and see how, you know, see how it does. Gardening requires lots of water, most of it in the form of perspiration. And that's the truth. Although I did have a gardener tell me once, well, if you're working really hard, you're working too hard. You're not gardening right. And I thought, okay. But so let's talk about maintaining that garden once you've got it going. Here's some tools of the trade. A lot of tools. You want a good garden shovel. This is flat. I prefer the ones that have a point on there. Garden fork is a must-have. Wheelbarrow is a must-have. A spade, yeah, you'd probably want to have that. Stirrup hoe, must-have. Good garden shears, gloves, and a rake. All those are kind of must-haves. Let's talk about weeds. This is a great quote. The difference between a weed and a flower is a judgment. And there's another quote that says that a weed is just a flower in the wrong place. These are 2 books. I have both of these books. They're fascinating. I would recommend them. Weeds and what they tell us. Weeds, if you're looking around your yard and you see the same type of weed everywhere, that's telling you something about your soil. And this book goes into that. So there's something going on with your soil, what nutrients are in there. Because if it's growing a certain kind of weed prolifically, that weed, it's a flower. We call it a weed, but let's say it is a plant. It's a flower, and it likes that soil it's in. So what is that soil? So that's telling you something about your soil. And this book really goes, this particular book here really goes into that. It's fascinating. It's not very thick, but it's a great book, as is this one, Weeds of the Northeast. This is a wonderful book. I've really enjoyed this. You get lost in this book. So I would recommend getting these 2 books for your garden library. Most weeds are either medicinal or food sources, to be honest with you, back in the day. And that's sometimes why we see so many of them, is at one point they were grown as a food crop. Purslane, we've all seen this. How I got interested in weeds is when I used to maintain people's gardens. In certain gardens, I would notice the same weeds, and all of a sudden, you know, my brain clicked in. I thought, wait a minute, what is this? You know, I'm calling it a weed, but again, it's a plant. So what is this plant and why is it here? And that's what got me to get those books and start looking into it. And it was fascinating. So purslane, I'm sure most of you have seen this in your garden. Well, it's highly nutritious, and it's the most frequently reported weed species in the world. And yet it is a food source. Pigsweed. I had some gardeners from Burundi, and my garden was infested in this, which I found out it loves nitrogen. So I had a lot of nitrogen in my soil. So this grew everywhere, and I had my gardeners came up one day with handfuls of it and asked if they could take it home. And I said, well, it's a weed. Why would you want it? And he said, no, this this is food. We cook this, we cook it with beans. So they took home bags and bags of this to eat, but they only picked it until like midsummer and late summer. They didn't want it anymore because they said it would be bitter. So I found, again, it's just fascinating. So it changed the way I looked at weeds. Instead of cursing them, I would look at them and say, what are you and what is your purpose in this world? Burdock. Now, I don't know anyone that likes burdock, especially if you have pets, because this stuff, it's the Velcro of nature, and we all know that. However, the fruit, seeds, roots, and leaves are used as extracts or teas. So again, great food source. Horrible thing to have in your garden or on your pet's fur, but it is a food source. Now, I'd say, as I have here, if you don't want it, catch it when it's small, because that has got one of the deepest root taps of any plant that I've ever come across. Dandelion. The sweet, misunderstood dandelion. My sister, she lived in the city and she would spray chemicals all over her lawn trying to kill the dandelions. And I would yell at her and tell her, would you quit doing that? And it wasn't until she moved to the country where she couldn't control the dandelions, and she began to notice all of the bumblebees on the dandelions in the springtime. And I'd been telling her for years, yes, this is the first food source for bees in the springtime. And it's also a great food source for humans. From root to flower, they're a highly nutritious plant. They're loaded with vitamins A, C, E, and K. They have minerals such as iron, calcium, magnesium, potassium. The roots often dried and used as a tea. I've never done that, but I've heard people do. Young leaves are great in salad. I have done that. And it's, as I said, one of the first food sources for bees in spring. So please don't spray those. I actually let these grow inside my garden. When they start getting out of hand, I'll start digging them up. But at the beginning of spring, I leave them alone. This is my number one tool for gardening that if anyone said, okay, what do I need for a garden other than a shovel? I would say, get this. This is called a stirrup hoe, excuse me. And it is wonderful, and it will change your life when it comes to weeding your garden. Other ways to get it done is to dig. Some of the roots go deep, like we said, with burdock and with the dandelions. Sometimes if you catch them when they're young, it's better. You can smother them with, things, black plastic or whatever. I will tell you though, black plastic will attract snakes. Mulch is your best friend. I, for years, refused to get mulch because frankly, I didn't want to spend the extra money. And most of my time in my garden was spent weeding. And I finally broke down and said, let's just try it. And wow, what a difference mulch will make. Now, don't get any of the dyed mulches. The dyed mulches, don't even go near those. The wood is usually made of the, what is that wood that you build with outside? The name, it's been soaked in chemicals. So that's what most of the dyed mulches, that's what that wood is. So get a natural mulch that will break down and help your soil. Additional maintenance, deadheading and pruning. No one likes deadheading, I guess, but every evening in the summertime, I'll go out and deadhead all my daylilies, and it really does make a difference in how long they will bloom. And annuals certainly benefit from deadheading. A lot of rose bushes benefit from deadheading. And it takes some time, but usually the evening or early morning is a great time to go out there and do that. But it does make a difference. So it's one of those jobs that you just have to do. And pruning, the same thing. And pruning can be scary. People, they get that clipper and they're just not quite sure. I bought my dad a bunch of rose bushes one year. And when I went to see him several years later, he would just kind of snip things off. And I was like, no, Dad, you got to really get after it. And he couldn't do it. So I had to get my clippers and go out there and prune those rose bushes. And of course, they made them healthier. So pruning is really important. I'm taking a course in March down in Brattleboro, Vermont, about pruning fruit trees, because it's just something you need to know how to do. So if you can find someone to teach you or read, or YouTube, YouTube is great. Again, that Monty Don has some nice YouTube videos about pruning. And that can be scary because usually you'll prune down to like 1/3 of the plant off. This is something that a lot of people don't know about, and that is leaves. Leave your leaves until it's above 55 degrees. Why? Because there are things in those leaves that you want. If we start on this side, bumblebee queens nest just below the ground or under piles of brush in the winter until spring when they emerge. So if you're going out there before they've woken up, you're killing them. Fireflies stay underground and under leaves for up to 2 years. So people are wondering why we're not having fireflies. Well, a lot of it's because of the pesticides that are getting sprayed. They're killing all the fireflies that are in the ground. And again, so leave your leaves. This is all about, in the fall, I don't clean up my garden in the fall. I don't cut anything back. I don't rake it. I leave everything as it is. And I can watch all winter and find things out there feeding off the seed heads of the flowers. Once spring does come and I do start cleaning up, I can see the signs of things that were living underneath all those leaves that fell. And it will break down and makes, and turns to soil eventually. So, don't get in too big of a rush to rake those leaves. Make sure it's above 55 degrees when all those insects have woken up and have left. If you look at this picture here, these all look like you just dried up leaves, but these are all different kinds of moths that we need, and you would never know it. So be gentle in the springtime with those leaves. Let them stay. And in the fall, let them stay for a while. You'll make a difference in the insect world. And then I've just got some pictures for inspiration. So I'll just flip through these. I won't talk because they're just gardens to look at to see what can be. I will talk on this one. I think this is a gorgeous, gorgeous vegetable garden with, again, the different flowers. Just, I don't think I'd ever leave. I think this is someone that's got OCD. This is one of my favorites. Love this one. We've got some native grasses back here, beautiful cone flowers here. This is my ideal of a beautiful space. And last but not least, if you have a garden and a library, you have everything you need. And that one more, we've got, these are grapevines, great pollinator garden in between the vines. And that is it.
Lizzie, I have to say you are an enormous resource. That was an incredible presentation that you have given to everybody, and certainly your years of gardening have paid off. You are a walking encyclopedia. We do have a few questions that got posed, and I think we'll also open it up to others after we answer those that got prioritized on the chat.
Sure.
People ask, where do you get a list of the native plants for Rockport? Is there a place where one can access that?
Well, I would just say I would look for native plants of Massachusetts or New England. I'm going to hold up a book, this book right here, which is called the Massachusetts Gardener's Companion. I thought of this later. This is a great book and has a lot of different plants. The book that I showed you earlier, written by Dan Jaffe, which was this one. This would be my go-to. In fact, I put in 9 new garden beds, large garden beds last fall, and I'm designing all of those beds based off this book.
Can I,
Go ahead.
this Shubra, I was just going to say, Lizzie, if I can put in a plug for the Native Plant Trust,
Yeah.
which is a nursery down in, it's in Framingham, I believe.
Yes.
And they only grow native plants, native to Massachusetts or New England, and they grow them locally.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks.
I would
Shubra.
strongly recommend them. I've ordered from there. You pre-order if you want, or you go down to the nursery, pick out what you want. They're very helpful. And yeah.
Doesn't
I would
Dan
recommend
Jaffe work there?
Yes, Dan Jaffe does work there.
Yeah. Yeah. So can you say that name again for everyone?
Native Plant Trust.
Yeah.
So
That's very helpful from both of you. Thank you.
Yeah.
It used to be known as Garden in the Woods.
Yes. Yes.
well,
yes.
it still is. No, the Garden in the Woods is the same thing. Garden in the Woods is where you actually walk along the trails. You know, it's a beautiful, beautiful space where they've done a lot of work designing, you know, more of a wild looking space, but with native plants. The Native Plant Trust is a place where you can buy these plants. They're in the same location.
Yeah. Thank you, Shubra.
Thank you, everybody, for that. That's helpful. Someone asks about the blacktails willow wart. How does one eradicate those? And the same thing with swallowwort.
That I would not be the person to ask for that.
I think Lisa might know. Lisa, are you there?
Well, basically what you do is make sure that you get all the pods that are put out every year. So in the fall, I know the invasive plant team went to a couple of houses near Millbrook Meadow, and we clipped the pods, and then we did something called tube. We put floral tubes, not filled with a cotton ball that was soaked in glyphosate, and put that over the stems of the plants to get them to soak it up into their roots over the fall. And hopefully we're going to eradicate it that way.
Thank you, Lisa. What about mentioning the importance of crop rotation? Can you speak to that for us, please?
Well, rotating, yeah, it's recommended to rotate your crops to cut down on disease, that if something's in that soil, that when you move a different crop there, the theory is, or I guess the practice is, that will help, you know, prevent that disease from spreading, and about how the nutrients disbursement as well. And you can you can go to websites that will help you about crop rotation. They'll actually have a chart that with beds that you can keep track of. Okay, last year I put my tomatoes here. This year I'm going to put them over here. I'm going to put something else here. And there is kind of a method to it based on what was planted there before as to what you would want to put afterwards. I've never practiced crop rotation as a rule. I do move things each year, but it's not something that I keep real close track of, but I know there are people who do. But there are websites that can give you charts for that, and you can have help with that, with those charts. I'm a lazy gardener. I got to be honest. I'm a lazy gardener, and so I'm not one that's going to keep real check on things. And I've, my veggies have, I make sure my soil is good. I make sure I've composted that soil and that it's free of disease and it's, it's nutrient rich. And that's kind of how I do things.
Thank you. That ends the questions that were here on the chat. Is there anybody still remaining who would like to ask anyone from the garden club a specific question?
This is Amy Sieben. I'm not sure you can hear me. I live up near the quarries, and are there plants that are really good to get rid of mosquitoes or to repel? I should say get rid of, but are there good plants? I'm looking at that for the spring.
You know, just the citronella, lavender is supposed to be good, rosemary, the mint family. In that area where you've got trees and water sources, it's going to be a little more difficult. But I have heard that those particular plants are good at helping to repel them.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'll also put in a suggestion. I'm using birds to eat the mosquitoes. So if you put feeders out, especially the blue jays and the woodpeckers, they love mosquitoes.
Well, and also
And-
bat houses, you know, you get some of those bat houses and put them on your house.
Yeah.
If you can attract bats, they eat millions upon millions of mosquitoes.
Okay, thank you. That's all the things I've looked at.
Thank you, Amy, for that question.
Yep.
Anyone else have any questions? You've got the experts right here.
I have a lot of the Japanese knotweed bordering my flower beds. And I just moved back here 6 months ago and I was digging them up. And there's all these little like, I don't know what you call them, white bulbs under the soil. And it just seems like they're gonna come forever. Is there any suggestion on how to get rid of Japanese knotweed?
We have
Very
our
difficult.
invasive team though, Laura Hollowell have, they're probably the best to get rid of that stuff. They've worked with it for a number of years. So I would suggest contacting our invasive team. And I think they do have a method. Again, Lisa Sims might be able to speak to that. I think she's involved in that as well. Are you, Lisa?
Yes.
I am. I
Yeah.
am.
We have a
Sure, we
great
can help you out.
invasive team. We have a great invasive.
Is that the garden club?
Yes. garden
Yes.
club. Yeah.
Okay, garden club. I'll have to join.
Please
You don't
do.
have to join, but.
You don't have to join. You don't have to join
No,
necessarily. I
yeah,
mean,
to
we'd
get
love you to
team help, you
join,
don't
but
have to join, but
you don't have to join. If you would reach out directly, go to our website and post your request a question. Lisa will direct it to the invasive team and they'll come over and they'll actually take a look at it and help you.
I have so many weeds that I feel like I just have to dig everything up and start from scratch.
You can't kill them. That's the problem.
I know the
Yeah.
feeling.
Not
Yeah.
is just very hard.
Yeah. Well, I'll
But
try.
knotweed is something that we've had great success with.
yeah.
You can get rid of that period.
Good.
You can do it.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I have to say the garden club, everybody seems to have a different area where they're have their expertise. And so you all come together and are a fully formed group that covers all of the bases. So that's amazing. You guys are incredible.
We
Anyone
really
else
do
have
have a
any
great team.
questions? I'm sorry, go ahead, Lizzie. I'm sorry.
I said, we really do have a great team. I love being a part of it.
Thank you for a tremendous presentation. I really appreciate it. I'll remind people again, that's communications@rockportgardenclub.org if you have specific questions or need to get in touch with them.
That's an email address. So just to let you
Excuse
know, it's
me.
not necessarily on the
Email.
website. It's,
Excuse me.
that's
Yes,
an email address.
thank you.
And yeah,
Yes.
it comes straight to me. So
And someone did ask the question, what zone was Rockport in? And Sherber was nice enough to answer that.
It's 6A, 6B. Yeah, it's 6A, 6B. But you know what? When I buy plants like perennials, I usually look for something that is zone 5 and above, because our zone, our area is getting warmer, no question, because of climate change. However, sometimes we get really, really, cold winters. And so I go for zone 5 I mean, for perennials, I look for zone 5 and above.
It's the same here in Vermont. When I first moved here, we were zone 3 where my house is. And I'm a good solid zone 4. And for about 10 years, we hadn't even gotten temperatures below 0. Well, this winter, don't you know, Mother Nature said, well, let's just remind you of what Vermont really feels like.
It really is. Like,
Yeah. And we got -30 again, which we had
Yeah.
not seen in a decade or more. And so, and I just kind of thought, because I was thinking, oh, I'm going to buy all kinds of zone 5 plants in zone, next year. And I thought, no, not quite. Not quite.
Right.
Yeah, I go for 4 or 5.
Yeah.
I feel like you're kind of guaranteed that it's going to be okay if it's for a much colder zone than your
Okay.
zone.
Right. The winds off the ocean too. I mean,
Well, that's what it is. It's not just how cold our area, New England gets. It's the winter wind that we get is the big killer.
and that's another reason for going for natives, because one of the things I found is that natives have evolved to really adapt to our region and the soil and whatever. And they do much better. And Lizzie mentioned buying plants at local plant sales, or or getting plants from your neighbors. Those plants have done the best in my garden. I used to buy a lot from nurseries. I don't anymore because they don't do as well.
I'm real fortunate. And when I was living down in Rockport, I missed my local nursery here in my town, Horsford's Nursery, because they grow everything there. They don't get plants shipped in. Everything is grown on site.
Right.
So I know when I buy a plant
You
there,
can find, those nurseries are great.
it's gonna work in my garden.
Anyone
I hope I
else?
didn't
out of time.
overwhelm anyone.
Anybody else have any other comments or questions? Okay, I don't see anybody else looking to speak or having a question. So again, a tremendous thank you to everybody who was a active participant in that. And again, that was a tremendous presentation, Lizzie, that you offered to everyone. So don't forget, come down, get your seeds starting tomorrow. And we're looking forward to having another seed season with the Garden Club and doing other projects going forward. So thank you
Great.
so much.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you, Lizzie.
Thank
Thanks,
you, guys.
everybody.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Mary.
Lizzie.
Thank you, everybody. You have a
Thank you,
good
Dana.
evening.
Bye.
Thank you.
Very nice.
All right.